They told her she was too plain for the screen. They said her face was wrong, her look too cerebral, her features too angular for Hollywood to ever truly want her. She was standing in the hallways of one of the most elite drama schools in the world, and the verdict handed down by the people who were supposed to shape her future was clear. Go home. You are not what this industry is looking for. She did not go home. She did not protest. She did not collapse or cry or beg anyone to reconsider. She simply looked at the people who had just dismissed her future as though they had said nothing of any real consequence, and she went back to work. What happened next is the kind of story that sounds like fiction until you understand that every single detail of it is true. Because within a few years of being told she was not pretty enough for the screen, Meryl Streep would become the most nominated performer in the entire history of the Academy Awards. She would win 3 Oscars across 5 decades. She would deliver performances in languages she taught herself from scratch. She would bury the love of her life, walk onto a film set months later, and produce what many film historians still call the single greatest screen performance ever recorded. She would be told by Hollywood that her time was over, that women her age were invisible, that the roles had dried up. And then she would come back and do it all over again at a level that left the industry speechless. She has been married. She has been separated after 45 years. She has managed a physical condition in secret for years that threatened the only instrument she had ever truly owned. She has navigated grief, loneliness, moral controversy, and the particular cruelty of an industry that builds women into icons and then waits impatiently for them to fall. She has not fallen. None of this is what you think it is. None of it is the story you have been told before. This is the version with the parts left out. This is the real Meryl Streep. And before this is over, you will understand not just who she became, but exactly what it cost her to get there, and why not a single moment of it was accidental. Mary Louise Streep arrived in the world on June 22, 1949, in Summit, New Jersey, and from the very first years of her life, the central tension of her entire existence was already quietly establishing itself. On the surface, everything about her childhood was perfectly ordinary. The house was comfortable. The family was stable. Her father, Harry Streep Jr., was a pharmaceutical executive, a man of precision and results, someone who moved through the world with the measured confidence of someone who had always known exactly what they were doing and why. Her mother, Mary Wilkinson, was a commercial artist, creative and quietly ambitious in the way that women of that era often were, carrying their dreams in the interior spaces that the world had not given them permission to fill. It looked like a perfect American family, and in many ways it functioned like one. Piano lessons, church on Sundays, a well-kept house in the kind of suburb that mid-century America built as a monument to order and aspiration. But beneath all of that, a young Mary Louise was already experiencing something she would spend years trying to name. She did not fit. Not in the way that ordinary awkward children do not fit, but in a deeper and more specific way. She was not the girl boys noticed first. She was not the one teachers instinctively imagined at the center of things. She was, by her own later admission, painfully ordinary in those early years. And she would eventually say something about those years that carries enormous weight coming from a woman of her subsequent stature. She said she spent a long time as a young girl trying to become what she believed others needed her to be. She bleached her hair blonde. She performed a version of femininity she had studied closely but never authentically felt. She built armor that looked like identity. And somewhere beneath it, the real person waited. What happened at Bernard's High School in Bernardsville, New Jersey is one of the first genuinely surprising chapters in her story. Because the young woman who felt she did not fit, who had spent years quietly constructing a performance of the girl she was supposed to be, became homecoming queen. She became a cheerleader. She achieved by every conventional measure exactly the kind of social success that American high school mythology promises and almost never delivers. And it made her lonelier than she had ever been. Because the girl behind the crown was already somewhere else entirely. She was already listening for something that pom-poms and popularity could not locate. She was already reaching toward a version of herself that existed in a room she had not yet found. That room turned out to be the stage. Her drama teacher, Esther Benson, was the first adult outside her family to look past the construction and see what was actually living underneath it. Benson recognized something in Mary Louise Streep that the rest of the school had either missed or was not equipped to name. She pushed her toward theater. Not the social performance that high school rewards, but the real thing. The stage where truth was the only thing that mattered. And something inside Mary Louise Streep cracked open in the best possible way. She arrived at Vassar College already consumed. She was not studying acting the way students study most subjects, with commitment and effort and the reasonable expectation of eventual mastery. She was throwing herself into it with the terrifying intensity of someone who had finally found the place where being too much was never going to be a problem. She read everything. She studied accents and physicality and the internal architecture of emotion. She dissected motivation. She built characters from the inside out and from the outside in simultaneously. She discovered that the stage was the only room she had ever occupied where she was never required to be less than she was. She graduated and pushed further, earning a place at the Yale School of Drama, which at the time was one of the most demanding and genuinely unforgiving acting programs in the world. Yale did not believe in encouragement for its own sake. Its professors were not in the business of making students feel good about themselves. They were in the business of truth, and they delivered it without softening. And the truth that Meryl Streep heard in those hallways, more than once from more than one person, was this. She was interesting. She was clearly talented. But she was not beautiful enough for leading roles. Her face was too angular. Her look was too specific, too cerebral, too something that the camera would not forgive. One faculty member, assessing her prospects for a film career, told her with apparent sincerity that she simply was not pretty enough for the screen. The words landed. She picked them up. She looked at them carefully. And then she refused them. Quietly. Without drama. Without protest. With the same interior fire that had always burned beneath the cheerleader smile and the homecoming crown. She graduated from Yale in 1975 and walked directly into a New York theater world that was electric with possibility and almost completely indifferent to one more ambitious young actress with no connections and no guarantee of anything. She auditioned relentlessly. She took small parts. She slept in apartments barely larger than the dreams she was chasing. Broadway noticed her slowly and then suddenly, the way truly inevitable things tend to arrive. Critics began to circle her name with the particular attention reserved for people who do something on stage that cannot quite be explained, but absolutely cannot be ignored. By the mid-1970s, Meryl Streep was not yet famous. But she was already, to those paying close enough attention, something rarer than famous. She was inevitable. And then something happened that would remake her entirely, that would reach into the architecture of who she was and rearrange everything permanently, without asking permission, without offering warning. His name was John Cazale. John Cazale is not a name that most people recognize today. He was never a household name during his lifetime either. But among those who truly understood acting, who had studied it and lived inside it and devoted themselves to its most demanding possibilities, John Cazale was regarded as one of the most gifted screen performers of his generation. Quiet, intense, precise. He had the rare and extraordinary ability to disappear so completely into a character that audiences forgot they were watching anyone at all. He appeared in only 5 films during the course of his career. Every single one of those 5 films was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. Every single one. That is not luck. That is not coincidence. That is the unmistakable fingerprint of someone operating at a level that transcends ordinary craft and enters something that does not have a clean professional name. Meryl met him in 1976 during a New York Shakespeare Festival production. She was 26 years old. He was 41. What began as a professional encounter became, with a speed that surprised even those who witnessed it, the most profound relationship of her life. They moved in together. They worked together. They built around themselves the particular kind of intimacy that only exists between two people who see the world through exactly the same strange and specific lens. She would later say that John taught her more about acting than any classroom, any professor, any technique, any book she had ever encountered. Not through instruction, not through theory, but through presence, through the terrifying and completely undefended honesty he brought to every single moment, on stage and off. Being near him, she said, was like standing next to someone who had made a decision, once and for all, to stop lying. About anything. Ever. It was the most complete and demanding kind of presence she had ever experienced. And it changed how she understood what she was supposed to be doing every time she stood in front of a camera or walked onto a stage. But the love story carried a shadow from almost the very beginning. John Cazale had been diagnosed with bone cancer. When Meryl Streep learned the full truth of his condition, she did not retreat. She did not protect herself. She did not begin the quiet emotional withdrawal that people who are afraid of loss sometimes begin before the loss itself arrives. She made a choice. She stayed. Completely. Without conditions. Without half measures. Without the kind of careful self-protective distance that would have been entirely understandable and that almost no one would have blamed her for. When production on The Deer Hunter began in 1977, a film that would go on to win 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture, John Cazale's illness was already known to the studio. The producers, facing insurance complications related to his condition, considered replacing him. Let that land for a moment. They were going to remove a dying man from what would become one of the most celebrated American films ever made. Meryl Streep, who had been cast in the film alongside him, made her position clear. If John was removed, she was leaving. She would not make the film without him. The producers reconsidered. John Cazale filmed his final role. He died in March of 1978. He was 42 years old. Meryl Streep was 28. The grief was not the kind that announces itself in public breakdowns or dramatic gestures, or the visible wreckage that other people can organize their sympathy around. It was the other kind. The quiet, devastating, bone-deep kind that settles in and never fully leaves. Friends from that period describe her as hollowed, present in body, somewhere else entirely behind the eyes. And yet, within months of his death, Meryl Streep delivered what many serious film historians still consider one of the greatest screen performances ever committed to film. Kramer vs. Kramer was released in 1979. It earned her the first of her Academy Awards. Then came Sophie's Choice in 1982, a role requiring her to perform convincingly in English, German, and Polish, to inhabit a character destroyed by a wartime trauma of unimaginable cruelty, to access a grief so specific and so total that most performers would not have known where to begin looking for it. She won her second Oscar. The performance has never been surpassed in any serious conversation about what screen acting is actually capable of achieving. What almost no one discussed at the time, and what very few people discuss even now, is how much of what lives inside that performance, the particular quality of the grief, the understanding of irreversible loss, the hollowness that no amount of craft can fully manufacture, came directly from John. She had loved someone completely and without reservation. She had watched that person leave in the cruelest possible way at the cruelest possible time. And rather than sealing that wound and moving on the way the world generally recommends, she had learned, at an enormous personal cost, to keep it open just enough to let it inform everything she touched. That is not technique. that is, transformation of an entirely different order. She met Don Gummer, a sculptor, just months after John's death. They married in September of 1978, 6 months after John died. Don Gummer would remain her husband for 45 years. He would father her 4 children. He would stand beside her through every Oscar campaign and every quiet controversy, and every season when the cameras were off and the real life continued without an audience. He was, by all external appearances, the anchor she needed, the stability that made the turbulence of the work survivable. But even that anchor, it would eventually emerge, was not without its fractures. Decades later, in 2023, reports surfaced that Meryl and Don had quietly separated. The marriage, long held up as proof that genuine stability was possible inside an industry built almost entirely on instability, had in fact been over for some time. The news arrived without announcement, without the dramatic unraveling that Hollywood separations usually provide for public consumption. No statements. No competing narratives released through publicists. Just the quiet adult acknowledgement that something long and significant had reached its conclusion. She was 74 years old. She had earned the right to redefine her life without requiring anyone's approval. There is a particular and specific loneliness that belongs exclusively to people who reach the absolute top of their field. Not the loneliness of obscurity, which is at least a shared condition, something that comes with company, but the loneliness of altitude. The silence that settles around a person when they have climbed so high that the air is different, thinner, harder to breathe. When the people who once walked beside them are no longer visible below. Meryl Streep reached that altitude in the early 1980s, and she would spend the better part of 2 decades learning what it actually cost to breathe up there. By 1982, she was not simply a celebrated actress. She was the actress, the fixed point around which the entire serious conversation about American screen performance rotated. Sophie's Choice had done something rare and irreversible. It had not merely earned her an Oscar. It had installed her in a category of one, and the perfectionism that had driven her from Summit, New Jersey through the stages of Yale, and onto the sets of Hollywood did not soften with success. If anything, it intensified. Meryl Streep was not the kind of actress who arrived on set and waited for direction. She arrived having already inhabited her character for weeks. Having studied the dialect, the posture, the specific emotional history and physical reality of the person she was about to become. She came prepared at a level that the industry had not quite encountered before and did not always know how to receive. And in Hollywood, an industry that runs on relationships and the comfortable lubrication of ego and flattery and the careful management of everyone's feelings, Meryl Streep's refusal to perform warmth she did not genuinely feel made her, to certain corners of the business, difficult. The word circulated quietly through the 1980s and never quite disappeared. Not cruel, not unpleasant, simply difficult. Dustin Hoffman, her co-star on Kramer vs. Kramer, reportedly slapped her without warning before a take, operating on the theory that the shock would produce a more authentic emotional reaction. Meryl's response, recounted years later with a precision that communicated volumes, was direct and unambiguous. She told him quietly and clearly that he was never to do that again, that she was an actress, that she did not need to be assaulted in order to access emotion, that the line he had just crossed was not a line she would permit to be crossed again. The films of the 1980s and early 1990s reflected the full and genuinely contradictory range of her ambition. Out of Africa in 1985, opposite Robert Redford, proved she could carry epic romance without surrendering any of her intelligence. Postcards from the Edge in 1990 and Death Becomes Her in 1992 revealed a comic precision as sharp and as deliberate as her dramatic instrument. But the decade also revealed the fault lines that fame could not repair and success could not protect against. The roles slowed, not because the talent had diminished by any measurable degree, but because Hollywood, in its particular and very well-documented dysfunction around women of a certain age, began to look past her toward younger faces. She spoke about this period later with a candor that the industry found uncomfortable precisely because it was so devastatingly accurate. She described attending a meeting with a studio executive in the late 1990s where the man, apparently uncertain how to address her directly, turned instead to her male companion and began the conversation there. She was in the room. She was invisible. She did not rage publicly. She did not issue manifestos or demands. She went back to the work. She found the role that would silence the argument. And she waited with the particular patience of someone who has already survived the unsurvivable and knows that endurance is its own form of power. The Devil Wears Prada arrived in 2006, and it was not merely a commercial success. It was a cultural event of a specific and unusual kind. Her portrayal of Miranda Priestley, the glacially powerful fashion editor whose silences were more terrifying than other people's screams, became one of the most analyzed and discussed performances of the entire decade. It earned her 14th Academy Award nomination, then Doubt in 2008, then Julie and Julia in 2009, then The Iron Lady in 2011, her portrayal of Margaret Thatcher earning her a 3rd Academy Award and making her the most nominated performer in the history of the Academy. 21 nominations across 4 decades, a number that belongs not to the history of film awards, but to the history of human persistence. And then in 2018, she made a disclosure that quietly reframed everything that her public had long observed about her. She revealed that she had been living for years with a condition affecting her hand, a tremor that she had quietly managed, quietly worked around, quietly accommodated into a performance style so controlled and so deliberate that no one watching her work had ever detected it. She offered this information not as a complaint and not as a bid for sympathy. She offered it almost as an aside, the way she offered most personal information, briefly, Precisely. With the air of someone who had made peace long ago with the thing she was describing, and who saw no particular reason to make more of it than it was. The cultural reckoning of 2017 brought its own complicated chapter. When the wave of allegations against producer Harvey Weinstein broke into public view and reshaped the conversation about power and abuse in the film industry, Meryl Streep found herself in an uncomfortable position. Weinstein had produced several of her films. She had thanked him publicly in acceptance speeches. Her response when the allegations became public was careful. She stated clearly that she had not known about his specific behavior toward other women. Some people accepted this. Others did not. She navigated the period without collapse. But the episode left its own particular residue, a complication in the public narrative that did not resolve cleanly and was not designed to. That same period brought personal losses of a different kind. Mike Nichols, the director who had guided her through some of her most celebrated work, died in 2014. Carrie Fisher, a friend and cultural companion across decades, died in 2016. Each loss a subtraction from the specific and irreplaceable world she had inhabited, a quieting of voices that had known her before the legend had calcified around her name. She spoke at Nichols's memorial with the kind of precision and love that only genuine grief produces. Those who were present that day describe a room that went completely still. In 2025, Meryl Streep is 75 years old, and she is by every available measure still becoming. The pace has changed. The relentless forward momentum that characterized the decades of peak production has softened into something more selective, more considered. She appears less frequently now. And when she does appear, the choice feels deliberate in a way that earlier appearances, driven partly by necessity and partly by compulsion, did not always. She is no longer proving anything to anyone. That particular freedom, earned at considerable cost across decades, is visible in everything she does now. She has let time show on her face. She has declined publicly and without apology to participate in the culture of cosmetic erasure that the industry she inhabits continues to demand of women with a persistence it never applies to their male counterparts. There is something political in that refusal. There is also something deeply and simply personal. The woman who spent decades transforming her appearance for roles has chosen in her private life to simply be what time has made her. Each line a record, each year a credential. Her 4 children are grown. Grandchildren have arrived. The Connecticut home that was once full of the productive chaos of a working family has quieted into something different. Something slower, more deliberate, more genuinely present. Her legacy at this point requires no further addition. 21 Academy Award nominations. 3 wins. A filmography that functions as a survey of the full range of human experience. A generation of performers who cite her not merely as an influence, but as proof that a certain kind of uncompromising commitment to truth in performance was possible, was survivable, was worth everything it cost. But the legacy she seems to value most is quieter than any of that. It lives in her children's voices when they speak about their mother. In the friends who have known her for 40 years and still find her genuinely surprising. In the performers she has mentored without fanfare, the causes she has supported without requiring credit, the private acts of loyalty and presence that left no public record and needed no audience. She once said, in the characteristically precise and underreported way she said most things that mattered, that the older she became, the more certain she was that the only thing that truly mattered was whether you had been honest. In your work, in your relationships, in your accounting of yourself to yourself. It is a simple idea. It is also one of the most genuinely difficult ideas there is to actually live by, particularly inside an industry whose entire machinery runs on the careful management of perception. Meryl Streep has lived by it anyway. Imperfectly, as all honest people do. With failures she has owned and losses she has carried and choices she has had to make peace with in the long, quiet hours that fame does not fill and that money cannot reach. She is not a legend. Legends are static. They belong to the past, and they ask nothing of us. She is something more demanding and more alive than that. She is a woman still asking the hardest questions, still doing the work, still, after everything, becoming. And that is the thing about her story that no award, no nomination, no cultural monument of any kind can quite contain. She was told her face was wrong. She buried the love of her life at 28 and walked onto a film set months later and gave a performance that changed what people believed was possible. She reached the absolute summit of her profession and found waiting for her there the same loneliness, the same grief, the same fragile and irreplaceable texture of an ordinary human life. She did not escape any of it. Not the loss, not the limitation, not the slow and humbling negotiations that time demands of everyone, regardless of how many awards they have carried across a stage. She simply refused to let any of it be the final word. And perhaps that is the truest thing her story offers. Not the career, extraordinary as it is. Not the awards, historic as they are. But the reminder that endurance is its own form of greatness. That the decision to keep going, to keep showing up honestly, to keep choosing presence over performance in the rooms that actually matter, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything.